Hello, good people, and welcome to another episode of The Flow. In order to go with the flow, first you got to understand the flow. So, one of the things that's happening around town, around the country, even around the world these days, is that everybody's saying it and everybody's wish it wasn't so. And that is this kind of polarized situation we're in, where even among family members, nobody wants to talk to each other for fear that we're going to touch on something and it's going to turn into an argument. And so today we have a wonderful model for you coming your way. Dr. Doug Cardell is with us today. He is the author of Socialism Struggles, and he's got a doctorate in economics. He's a teacher. He is a advisor to congressmen. He is knowledgeable, and we are going to have a conversation about economics and money and how it is. And I think that we're going to agree on some points, and we may not agree on all points, but I think we're going to have a great conversation. And I hope that it is a model for how you can have a dignified, intelligent conversation with somebody who may not agree with you on everything. But I think, and I'll put this question right to you, Doug. I think that as long as your aspirations for the world that you want to live in is even remotely similar, you can have a good conversation. I think we differ not on where we want to get to or the strategies, but the tactics. How do we get there? And good people can argue about that or talk about that. What do you think? Is that about right, Doug? Dr.
I
Doug.
think it's absolutely right. And I guess I should point out, I'm a member of the Sons of the American Revolution, and I've been preparing a thing for them that I'm going to do in 3 or 4 months. I don't remember exactly, and my fourth great grandfather was killed in the Battle of Wyoming in Pennsylvania, and I should point out that things were a lot worse then. In that battle, there were very often brothers against brother and cousins against cousins, because some people took the side of the Tories and some took the side of the Patriots. And of course,
Correct.
that was obviously also true in the Civil War, where I had relatives that fought. And so, at least we aren't shooting each other now. So that's a big plus.
Yet. Don't let me be too pessimistic. No, you're right. Things have been worse. One of my favorite bloggers is Heather Cox Richardson, who's a history teacher. And many times her blogs speaks about other times in our history where we have confronted big divides and somehow we've survived it. So yes, that's right. And I just have to say, as a personal note, for you guys that can trace your history back to 4 grandfathers, great grandfathers, to me, I can't even wrap my head around it, because I am a first generation American. My father immigrated from Hungary, went through Ellis Island. His is the archetypical immigrant's story. It was a different time even then. I'll tell you something that I think you'll enjoy hearing. He arrived in the late teens, early 20s. And by 1932, he opened a popcorn store. And that was his pathway to the American dream. And by 1936, he was naturalized. And when he was naturalized, he wrote a letter to his congressman and enclosed a check for $250. And in 1934, $230 was a chunk of change. And in the letter, he said to his congressman that he wanted to thank him for allowing him to become a citizen of this new country. And he wanted to express his thanks by making this contribution to the Treasury. And the check was made out to the United States Treasury. And he got a letter back from the congressman thanking him for that. And I have that framed up in my office today. But those were different times. Immigrants were looked at differently and they felt differently. So you're right. We have gone through many other times, and we survived them, and God bless.
Well, and I should mention that on my father's side, my grandfather was an immigrant.
Mm-hmm.
So I have both sides to look at.
Yeah. Hey, as far as that side goes, it's funny because I think of my father, and my history goes back there, and it kind of like takes a right turn and goes to Hungary. But yours goes back generation after generation after generation, and that just must be marvelous. But let's talk economics. Your
Sure.
book says socialism struggles. So why don't we start off by defining some terms? Because
Sure.
these days that word socialist is kind of tossed around willy-nilly. Some people on the far right think that all Democrats are socialists, and maybe some are. And then there's socialism, there's communism, there's capitalism, there's democracy, there's authoritarianism, and I think these words all kind of get conflated because some are economic systems, some are political systems. So let's just start with that. How do you differentiate between capitalism, socialism, and communism?
Well, capitalism and socialism obviously are the most different. We can sort of lump fascism, socialism, and communism into one little pot. They're very, very close cousins. It's a question of degree more than anything else, and the degree is not that great. Um,
Well, let me
in
let me just
socialism,
let me just ask a
sure.
question there. Uh, my understanding, the difference between fascism and socialism, in terms of how they run a country, aren't very different, but their ideologies are very different, are they not? I mean, in fascism, we're saying that we're a very special people and we deserve to rule. And listen to me, it's very authoritarian, kind of right wing authoritarian. Whereas socialism is a difference in ownership of property. In other words, in fascism, the dictator owns everything. In communism or socialism, the theory is that the people own everything, but it turns out that the state really owns everything. Am I off here? Is that correct, or what? How do you see it?
Well, fascism in general doesn't necessarily imply anything right wing, to use your
Mm-hmm.
phrase. It it doesn't necessarily imply the employment of a master race. And in fact, for example, in Mussolini's case, it did not. Um, so the fascism is primarily an economic system. The
Uh-huh.
main difference between fascism and socialism is that socialism believed in a worldwide movement, whereas most fascist countries are national movements. So if you consider nationalism to be right wing, I guess you could say that. But that's the primary difference is that
Uh-huh.
in fascism, they're they're in fact the Nazis, um, their Nazi is a shorthand for the National Socialist Party. So they were a
Uh-huh.
socialist, but they were a nationalist party, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to a part of Marx's worldwide nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the difference with communism, oh, well, let me start. Socialism is where the, the government owns the means of production and all property. Fascism is where the government controls the means of production and all property. So that's what I mean. The difference is so slight that it's hardly worth talking
Mm-hmm.
about because it doesn't matter whether you're controlling it or owning it, the result is the same.
Mm-hmm.
Communism is a myth. It has never happened, it's never going to happen. The idea behind communism, Marx's plan was the socialism would become so successful that the government would wither away, was his phrase. Well, when people get in power, it's never going to wither away. I think we both know that. And
Mm-hmm.
so,
That's true.
yeah, even to talk about communism is a waste of time.
Okay.
Um,
All right. So,
The reason I wrote
for simplicity, then we'll group fascism in with socialism. We won't worry about communism, and we'll just look at the difference between capitalism and socialism.
yeah, in capitalism, obviously, the people basically own all property and all means of production. Um, Now, some would argue that corporations aren't people, and whether they are or not is unimportant because they're a product of people.
Mm-hmm.
So um, it isn't like there's some government control going on there.
Right,
It's
right.
it's
No, the
the
law even
corporations,
says
nature.
that corporations are at least legal people. They can own property, they can sue and be sued. So it's certainly not government. Corporations are not government. Correct.
Right. And so, I mean, that's the essential difference. The reason I wrote the book and the reason I'm concerned is that is sort of what you alluded to early on. People throw words around, they don't know what they mean. And I hear a lot of people talking about they think socialism is a good idea. My concern is that we will end up in a socialist country by accident.
Mm.
When Venezuela elected Chavez, they thought they were electing what they thought was the democratic socialist. And it didn't take long for it to become socialism. And by the time he passed it on to Maduro, it was hardcore socialism. The government did indeed own the property and the means of production and basically ruined the country. Took it from the probably the fourth or fifth uh, best off country in Latin America, South America, and turned it into a place where nobody wanted to be.
Mm.
Uh, and I'm concerned that the same thing could happen here. I think that too many people don't see the difference. They talk about democratic socialism, and that's another one of those myths. It's an oxymoron. Socialism cannot be democratic. Obviously, if the government owns the means of production, if they own all the property, where's the room for democracy?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think what they are mostly referring to is some of the European countries that call themselves social democracies. And what they mean by that is they're a capitalist country that has a slightly larger safety net than the US has.
Ah.
And if that's what they're talking about, that's a whole different discussion.
Uh-huh.
But I don't think any of the people that are talking about that are really saying we'd like to have a country like North Korea.
No.
And that would be socialism. And right now, North Korea is the only truly socialist country left. And so, if they're advocating for that, I think they're just nuts.
Yeah, right. Right. Well, so if you're talking about owning, or I mean, let's just jump into this. If you're talking about owning or controlling the means of production, that can either be ingrained systemically, or it can be as applied. Because taking a look at what's going on in the country today, we have our government negotiating for ownership of various companies, taking a big, large stock ownership in a lot of companies, and or threatening to take their licenses away. For example, CBS. There apparently has been some. There has been. I mean, without any question, I don't think there's any question about this. That the Federal Communications Commission's threatened CBS with taking its license away, subsequent to there being some criticism of the government by some of the late night folks on CBS and some of their reporting. That's also another way to control the means of production, by threat and by take. So, would you say that those actions of the administration are moving us towards socialism, or is your concern coming about our falling into socialism from a different perspective?
Well, let me preface it by saying I don't know how old you are, but I'm old enough to have lived through 15 presidents. And
Mm-hmm.
um,
76.
I'm 78. And so,
There you go.
uh, uh, and there has not been one that I've agreed with everything or disagreed with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that includes their administrations, not just their personal views.
Sure.
In the case of the two things you just mentioned, I think buying stakes in companies is a big mistake. Um, that's the definition of socialism. So,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, the current administration is, I think, has recently acquired a 10% stake in Intel. And, they make the argument, well, it's only 10%, but I think it's a very slippery slope. I think that
Mm-hmm.
if we do 10% now and be 20% tomorrow, and pretty soon they'll be owning means of production. The thing about CBS, I understand the instinct, but I think it's probably not a good idea. I mean, a lot of people on the conservative side have been concerned for years that the media is ridiculously left leaning. And it's pretty hard to make a case that they aren't. I mean, but you look at the late night shows, and yeah, they
Well, yeah, but you
most of
look at
them.
Fox and Outlook and all of those. I think it's balanced off pretty much. Matter of fact, there's a terrific news service I've been looking at lately called Ground News, and I've subscribed to it. And what I love about it is that it reports on hundreds and hundreds of news stories, and at the bottom of every headline, it has a red line, a white line, and a blue line indicating, and it has a bias rating and it has a factual actualization rating. And it also counts the number of news sources from the left and from the right and from the center that are reporting on it. And what I'm finding as I look through all of these things, that it's remarkably well balanced. The center is usually about the same size as the left and the right, and I see blind spots. Some articles are just not reported at all by the left, and some are not reported at all by the right. But um, I think that there certainly is some bias, but the traditional and the old style papers, they generally report accurately. They may have some bias in what they choose to report on, but if you take a look at the number of people that simply watch Fox and nothing else, it's hard for me to accept a a narrative or a theory that the media is left wing biased, because at least half the country looks at right wing news
Mhm.
exclusively. So I don't get it that it is left, but it's biased to the left.
I think that the people that are concerned about that are thinking primarily what might be best described as legacy media.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah, like
and and
you think like the New York Times and the Washington Post, owned by Jeff Bezos, who is very much of a Trump supporter, is left biased, is biased to the left?
no, no, I don't.
Okay.
What I was saying is what I think some conservatives think,
Oh yeah,
not
some conservatives,
necessarily
sure.
what I think.
Yeah, conservatives
Um,
think that news is biased to the left, and left people, liberals, are concerned about Fox News and its progeny. So yeah, I mean, of course, if you look at any news source through your own filters, you're going to say it's biased. Of course, I'm not biased, right? I have a good, clear, straightforward, unbiased mind, but they're biased. That's just human nature. But
yeah,
anyway.
and the spread you mentioned, I talked about the Revolutionary War earlier. Uh, that same spread existed then. It was about a third left, a third right, a third center. So
Mm-hmm.
about a third that wanted to leave England, a third that wanted to stay with England, about a third that didn't care one or the other.
Right. Yeah. That's kind of human. But I didn't really, I wasn't really referring to the question of whether or not the administration are justified in not liking the commentary. What I am talking about is either it's CBS or it's anybody who threatens or talks badly or doesn't do what the administration wants them to do. Their pattern has been to threaten them with something. And
Yeah, I think that's clearly wrong.
the only you think I'm wrong on that?
I think that's clearly wrong. That's what I said, is that I understand why they might feel that way, but I think doing things about it is not what we need. We need
Oh
free
yeah, but
speech.
that's what so we agree that they're doing it, but I agree that it's not a good idea. What my question is owning pieces of it and threatening people to do what you want them to do, is that a move towards government control of the means of production?
Yeah, well, owning parts of the company is a move towards socialism. And the thing about keeping down free speech, I would say, is a move toward fascism.
Yeah. So going back to the question, when you said you have a concern about us falling into socialism, I guess my question is it coming from some of the actions being done by this administration, or is it coming from some other concern that you have?
Well, the things that have happened, the two things we've talked about, at least, that this administration has done, I see as being relatively fleeting.
Okay.
They aren't things that we have enough history of that I've got to go, oh my gosh, this is, I would like to see it stopped, and I would not like to see it continued or amplified. But my concern is more with the people themselves, the people
Okay.
that just elected Mamdani in New York, or what's her name in Seattle. That's scary.
Okay. So I guess the best question is, what is it that is concerning you about our slide into socialism?
Well, sort of like I mentioned about Venezuela, that people will vote for what they think are democratic socialists.
Mm-hmm.
Although if you look at the website of the Democratic Socialists of America, they themselves say it's a waypoint towards socialism.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And
Well,
so,
if so, but what is it that's happening? You say you're concerned that we're going to fall into socialism. So tell me, what is the source of that concern?
well, right now AOC uh, is leading in the polls for the Democratic presidential primary in 2028. That's
Hmm?
scary. Um, that to me would mean that we could very easily elect someone like that would fairly rapidly transition to true socialism.
And you think that would be possible considering the checks and balances that our government is made of? So you think that just the president alone is powerful enough to move us towards socialism or towards authoritarianism?
Well, it depends on how many people like that get elected to Congress at the same time and so on.
Uh-huh.
Um, the Supreme Court, I don't think, would serve as an adequate check in that regard, because they, in general, don't do a lot involving economics. So, is there
So
anything unconstitutional about the government owning the means of production? And I'm pretty familiar with the Constitution, and I'm not seeing that.
yeah.
Um,
Wait, Doug, I'm getting a little um confused. Okay,
sure.
this is what I'm hearing you say. The Trump administration, which is, I don't think there's any question that it's about self-enrichment. Guy's tripled his value, the value of his personal wealth. He's trading stock with no oversight personally, and then creating benefits to the stock that he buys by making political announcements after he buys. He's creating a $1.8 billion slush fund or fund that he wants to give out without oversight. These to me all seem like pretty scary, dangerous movements towards I get to do what I want, the way I want to do it, whenever I want to do it. And he has a Congress that has enough people in it to validate it. And the Supreme Court is not running much of a check and balance on it. So that's over on this side, but you call that fleeting. On the other hand, you say if AOC gets elected, that's dangerous. And that's scary, especially if she were to get enough people in Congress to support her. So on this side, which you have this clear, he tells us he's going to do it and he's doing it, and we have historical basis for saying that this man is moving towards authoritarianism, but you feel that's fleeting, but yet you're scared about AOC coming into the same situation with a Congress that supports her. I don't get that. It seems to me you would be just as scared of this administration as you would be of AOC. I'm confused.
No, I'm with you. The reason I say fleeting is most of the things that you mentioned are functions of Trump's personality. They aren't things that are going to carry on after Trump is gone. They are Trumpism things.
But he
And
has
that's what I mean by
30% of the
fleeting.
people that are Trumpists, and they will want to replace him with J.D. Vance, who's just as he ain't no different.
Well, he may not be different politically, but most of the things you mentioned, things like enriching themselves or blah, blah, blah. I don't mean blah, blah, blah in a negative way, but the other things that go along with that are things that I see as fleeting. That's dependent upon the personality of the president. It's not a matter of changing the government. That's the difference I see is that one involves an actual change in the function of government, and one involves a personality issue, I guess I would call it.
Why do you think that Trump isn't trying to change the government? He says he wants to be king. He wants to do away with checks and balances. He wants to have an authoritarian dictatorship of a government. That's changing the government. We're in a constitutional crisis now where he is ignoring the courts. That's changing the government. The courts, there have been 172 court orders that he has ignored. Our whole basis for a country is based on trust and our submission to the rule of law, where when a court orders you to do something, you do it. And he's not doing it, which means he's not obeying the Constitution. And if that's not a change of government, I don't know what is. So I think what you're saying is if AOC comes, she is a declared socialist, and she wants to move us to a socialistic form of government, which is a change of government. But Trump wants to move us to a non-constitutional democracy, or a Orbach-like illiberal democracy. This is. I mean, that was his idol. Was the Hungarian illiberal Democrat, as he called it. So, I mean, I just don't understand why you distinguish, where there is distinguishing between just saying, well, just what Trump's doing, that's just fleeting. It's based on him. No, it's based on power and money. And whoever his successor is going to want to keep that. I mean, why do you think all of these people in Congress who know better continue to support him? Because they're scared that he's going to primary them. I mean, the whole situation has become non-democratic, or he would like to go that way. So it seems like, you're saying, well, that is just fleeting and it'll pass, but there won't be any checks and balances if somebody like AOC gets elected, and I'm really worried about that, and I just don't see the difference.
Well, I certainly respect that. Again, all I can do is basically repeat what I've said, which is I really do see it as a transitory thing. I don't think any of the things that you've expressed as concerns would happen under J.D. Vance or whoever succeeds Trump, even if he has a Congress behind him and so on. I think you mentioned why does the Congress support him? I think in general the Congress supports his broader agenda. I don't think they are supportive of his day-to-day actions, if you want to call it that, which is the way I see the things you're concerned about. The broader things, like for example, the stuff in the big bill they passed, are things that I think they believe in too, and those aren't things that are endemic to, I guess, what you could call Trumpism. Um, they're part of an overall conservative agenda, and I don't see anything in those. I don't see anything in the bills that have been passed that concern me. There are things I would disagree
Okay.
with, but I don't see anything frightening there.
All right. You know, the entire structure of democracy is based on trust in institutions. There's not an army that the court has that it can send out to enforce its dictates. I mean, we have a police force that's state oriented, but it is trust in institutions that is the cohesive glue of any democracy. And when somebody is systematically dismembering the trust that we have in the institutions, when he's doing damage like that, when he is making fun of our allies, when he threatens to leave NATO, he's talking about sea changes in who we are as America. And when the trust is gone, why can't he run a third time? Why can't his son become the next great leader? If he decides to put him in, why can't he absolve, or why can't he just, and I suspect he's going to when it comes up for our midterm elections. I mean, why do you create a $1.776 billion fund that you can pay anybody, including the people that have been convicted of sedition and conspiracy to destroy America and who are continuing to do criminal events, give them millions of dollars? Why are you doing that? You're doing it to create your own private army. Why would you create your own private army? To create chaos at an election so you can declare martial law, so you can suspend the election so he doesn't lose power. Come on, these are really scary things. You don't see that? You don't see the crumbs and the dots that the way he's putting it together? I mean, that
Well,
happens.
I see the
If that happens, we don't have an America anymore.
Well, if that were to happen, I would be the first guy out there in the street with a rifle. So I'm, and I think that's what would happen. There'd be a lot of people like me. I don't think there's any chance it's going to happen. I think that
Mm-hmm.
it's a concern that my view of the way Trump does things is he says a lot of stuff, but it's part of his deal making mentality. He he says stuff to try and throw people off their game, and but it's none of it is stuff that's really going to happen. The fact that he didn't do it the first time, I mean, he got unelected and he complained about it, but it still happened. He didn't try and start a revolution.
Well, it
And I
was a
think a
little
lot of
different because he had a lot of folks around him that acted as guardrails. You take a look at the personnel that's around him between then and now, he learned from that. He did not take and appoint to places to the things and bring in as his closest confidants. He had respected generals. He had Mattis. He had others who told him, don't do that. Now he doesn't. He's unrestrained. I mean, you may say that he says that he's going to do things and he doesn't do it, but he did, in fact, create this settlement with the Department of Justice. He did get a $257 million to plan his Arc de Triomphe, excuse me. He did take the reflecting pool, and get his guy who does pools.
Yeah,
I mean, he
I
does that.
understand that he does. Yeah, he does stuff, but none of those things aren't, to me, aren't threatening. If he wants to build
He
arches,
he
what do I
stopped
care?
he stopped sending arms to Ukraine. Now people are dying. He dismantled U.S. aid. So far, 728,000 preventable deaths since U.S. aid was dismantled. Our eyes and ears on the ground with this Ebola virus are not there because U.S. aid was dismantled. He did that. He brought in Doge, and they hollowed out the government, just willy nilly firing people. And now, when there's nobody to answer the phone for the older folks who are trying to get some relief on their Social Security, ain't nobody there. But U.S. aid alone is a moral tragedy. What he did there. And he did it. That's done.
I understand your concern, but again, that's an overall conservative position. That's not Trump. Not particularly. A lot of the things you're mentioning are things that the conservatives have wanted for a long time, and Trump is just the first one to actually do it.
The extreme conservatives, most middle road conservatives understood the value of US aid. And why is it that it survived ever since the Marshall Plan? Through conservative administrations, through the Bushes, through Reagan. Reagan didn't dismantle it. Why? Because there was value there. No, this guy brought in some people and unconstitutionally, because he wanted to, sent a bunch of 20-year-olds in there to tear this thing down without any authorization. This was an agency that was created by Congress, and he, sui generis, on his own, went in and destroyed it, dismantled it. Then that's not executive privilege. That's not even legal. So, that's something that he did. It's not something that he said he was going to do and didn't do.
Well, again, to me, at least in my view, those are things that the next time the Democrat president is elected, he can undo. I don't see a permanent threat there. I don't see a permanent change in America. But if you're right, like I said, I'll be the first one to fight it.
Okay. All right. Well, I probably talked too much already. But again, I'll just say that I think that you're minimizing the danger and the damage that this guy is doing. But that you're the guest. I'm sorry. I want to hear
no problem.
I want to hear what you have to say. So AOC gets elected. What is going to happen to America? How is that going to slide us into an economic situation that's not helpful?
Well, she has people advising her that actually do want to take control of property and take control of the means of production. And that is socialism. And once that starts happening, because of the way socialism works, once it starts, it's very hard to reverse, because what tends to happen is you do a little bit and it doesn't work. So the impulse is to do still more, and it still doesn't work. In fact, things get worse. So you do even more. So things get even more worse. And that's happened every time it's been tried. And that's my concern, is that if we start down that path, if she were to get elected, we may never elect anything but a socialist again.
Okay, so
that's what I mean by not. It could very well be permanent. And again, I'd be out in the street with a rifle again, but it scares me. I think.
Why couldn't she be unelected?
Because of the way socialism works. If things get worse, and she's able to get, she or anybody like that. I mean, it
Okay.
doesn't have to be her, but uh,
Okay.
sort of like what's happening with Mamdani in New York. I mean, we're sort of seeing a preview, and things are getting worse and pretty quickly. And the question will be, can he convince voters that they're worse because he didn't do enough? And if he's able to do that, he may get reelected, and he may get other people like him reelected. And that's what has always happened in socialist countries until it gets so bad that there's a revolution.
So what I'm hearing you saying is that whether it's Trump or Mandami, that's not the real problem. The real problem is an uninformed and uneducated electorate.
Absolutely. And an electorate that doesn't care. I mean, I should point out that
On this, I
Mamdani
agree with
was
you
elected.
100%. On this, I agree with you 100%. That
Yeah,
our education
Mamdani was
system.
elected.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Mamdani was elected by an eighth of the people in New York.
Mm-hmm.
He won 51% of the vote, but only a quarter of the people voted. So that's, to me, is the biggest problem, is that people don't know and don't care. And that's why I wrote the book, is I want people to care. And um, if they consider Trump to be as big a threat as I consider socialism, great, go out there and vote. I'm I'm not here to take sides or pick winners and losers, but
Mm-hmm.
I think the most important thing is an informed, thoughtful electorate that actually votes.
Mm-hmm. So I'm 100% with you. I mean, even our founding fathers, all of the Benjamin Franklin's comment when he was asked, "What did you create?" and he said, "A republic, madam, if you can keep it."
Mhm.
And all of the other ones that talked, even in the Federalist Papers, about an informed electorate and the like. Of course, they were living in a time when the electorate was white men who owned property. And it was a small percentage of the population, and they were generally very well educated. I mean, if you read the Federalist Papers, you can see that they're really. But be that as it may, they still made these comments that this depends upon an electorate that is informed, and rational in their decision making. And I'm 100%. But you know,
Well,
I
and
how
going
do we
back
get
to,
there? How do we get there? If that's the problem, how do we solve that problem?
well, I mean, I guess I would say this. I wrote a book because of my
Mm-hmm.
concern about socialism.
Right, right.
Maybe you should write a book about your concern about Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think that's ultimately the answer, is that we need smart people to try and do things to educate others. And uh, I should also point out, going back to where you actually began our conversation, one of the things that the founders were concerned about, as shown in the Federalist Papers, is political parties.
Mm-hmm.
They called them factions, but what they, in our terms, they were political parties, and they thought that that could indeed cause big problems for the country. And I think that has indeed been the case. That
Mm-hmm.
there are a whole lot of people out there that pull a red lever or a blue lever and have no idea what they're doing.
Right. What do you think about the more those governments which have multiple parties, and each idea has the possibility of being represented by a cadre of folks who agree with that idea, and eventually enough of those factions have to come together into a coalition to create a governing body? Is that more representative, do you think, that parliamentary kind of approach towards democracy?
Yeah, I think it may be, but I also think a lot of the things that government does um, helps make things worse.
Hmm.
Um, if I could change a lot of stuff, I know one thing that I know is important to you because we've spoken before about it is the decision of Citizens United. I
Mm-hmm.
think money in politics is a real evil. I think I think it has to be stopped. And my solution would be what the Supreme Court said is that money is speech. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's say it is. What we could do is pass legislation saying that anybody running for office can accept no more than $100 from any one person or entity. Now, how does that get around Citizens United? Well, Citizens United says money is speech. If that's speech, taking the money is listening. And so you can't restrict the speech, but you can restrict the listening. You can say they can offer the money, but you can't take it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a whole different issue. And I think that would fly. I don't see how the Supreme Court could say people are forced to listen just because somebody says has speech. And so I'm obviously glossing over a lot of the fine points, but I
Mm-hmm.
think an approach like that could certainly work.
Or what
I think
we may need is a constitutional amendment.
Yeah, of course, yes,
If
that would
you know,
probably.
overturning that,
Although
and
legislation would probably do it, I don't think the Supreme Court would rule against it. Um, I think the logic stands. I mean,
well,
um,
I guess you know what it is. Using the you can't. Speech is free, but you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. So
mhm,
although you can't prohibit speech, you can have reasonable restrictions even on a constitutional right to bear arms.
mhm.
You can put restrictions on that. You can freedom from unreasonable searches. You can have exigent circumstances. So all of our rights are subject to some kind of control within reason, and not prohibiting financial contributions, but restricting them on the understanding that the state has an extraordinarily important interest in maintaining fair and free elections, and avoiding propaganda and making sure that the information of the electorate comes to that. Anyway, I think that you're right. Legislation probably could do it if it was crafted well.
And then some other things that I would do that I think government has perverted, I guess I would say, is
Mm-hmm.
I would say that every bill has to have an expiration date. Uh, Part of the problem with partisanship and part of the reason I think it exists is because everybody knows that once you get the law passed, it's almost impossible to get rid of it. But if they all expired, I mean, we could debate about numbers 5 years, 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
25 years, and it might depend on the kind of bill. But I think they should have an expiration date.
Mm-hmm.
Another
No,
thing
I
I think
think
is really,
that makes sense. At least it would require your representative to take a position pro or
exactly.
con the law. And then if you're happy with their position, you can keep them. And if not, you can take them out. But what about the idea of term limits? I'm kind of mixed on that because, I know that after 40 years of trial law, I'm probably a bit better of a lawyer after 40 years of experience than I am when I tried my first case. And it seems like it's a shame just to say, just after somebody finally figures out, how to get around in government and how to be effective, let's kick them out and bring somebody else in. But then again, I see that people do get inured in their position and they start to get distance from their own constituencies. So I'm a little mixed about that one.
yeah, I think I am too. And for much the same reasons. I'm a little maybe more concerned than you are that the people that are getting good at being legislators are getting not good at doing things for the people, but getting better at making behind the scenes deals.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure I'm tickled to death about that.
Right.
Um, some other things I would change would be I think we have to do what we can to stop gerrymandering.
Yes.
I think one thing we could do that might help with that is to say that however you end up drawing the districts, it has to match the voter registration in your state. And so if your state is 60% Democrat and 40% Republican, then 60% of your representatives have to be Democrat and 40% have to be Republican. And I think that would go a long way toward helping. There might be other things we would have to do, but I think that would help. Another thing I would do is make all bills require a supermajority. You know, people rail against the Senate because they get to overrule. They have to have 60 votes, but I think that's not a bad thing. I think that
No, that's a great thing.
If a law is a really good idea and you can't get any more than 51% of the people to agree with it, how does that make it a good idea? I mean, if you can't get pretty broad consensus on why something is a good thing to do, well, maybe you shouldn't do it. And, you know, we can argue again about is it 2/3, 3/4, whatever, but
Right.
I think it should be a supermajority of some sort or another. I think another thing we ought to do is eliminate omnibus bills. A bill should be one thing. We're going to pass this law. That's it. Because too much of the time we end up with tons and tons of junk in bills that nobody even knows what they are. There's just junk going by. And we get a lot of really bad law that way.
Yeah. I don't think anybody likes the idea of saying to the senator from Alaska, well, I know that you don't want to vote for this bill, but if you do, we'll put in a provision that Alaska gets this, that, and the other thing. You know, that's just nobody likes that stuff.
No, but that's exactly what happens when you're allowed to have bills be more than one thing. And sort of like you mentioned earlier, if you have every bill being one thing, then you have a way to judge your representative a lot better because he voted for this specific thing. It wasn't just some part of a giant bill that he could say, well, yeah, but there was other good stuff in there. It was one bill. He either was for it or against it, and now you've got something to vote for him or against it. So I think a lot of these problems that we blame on capitalism are really problems of government. That
you're right.
If we put some serious restrictions in place, I think a lot of the problems would take care of themselves.
And, you know, one of the things I was just, I had another podcast a couple of days ago, and I was making the suggestion that unrestrained capitalism can also produce some pretty unfair results because certainly corporations are not in the same even level playing negotiating field as the individual, and go in and buy a General Motors car and you get a 15-page contract. You're not going to negotiate that. Either you take it or you leave it, and the like. And the person said, you know, Bob, you're right, but that's not a problem with capitalism, because just because it's a free market doesn't mean there aren't rules. I mean, it's like if you go out and play hockey, you know, you want your hockey players to be as free as they can to use the strategies and tactics and train and try to be the best team they can be. But there are still rules. I mean, you can't just take the hockey stick and whack somebody in the head. So even when we talk about free capitalism, we're not talking about unregulated, but there's also got to be a balance there.
Not. At least I'm not. I call them guardrails. And I think I can give you what I consider a pretty good analogy. We should deal with the economy like we deal with the environment. In general, people should be free to do a lot of stuff, but there have to be guardrails in place because some people will always try and exploit any system, including the actual environment.
Right.
So putting guardrails in place to keep people from doing bad stuff is a good thing. That's what we should be doing with capitalism. And, you know, I know you and I disagree to some extent on wealth inequality, but I would argue that the morality is in how you get it, not what you've got. And if somebody is, I don't care how much somebody gets, if they get it morally. If what they're doing is legitimate, right, moral, I'm fine with that. If they're doing it by hook or by crook, then that's government's fault. And government should be putting a stop to that. And so, to me, there's nothing at all immoral about anybody having anything. The only way you can question the morality is by saying they got it the wrong way. And I
That's
don't know how
true.
you
Now,
feel about that. But
I absolutely agree with you that if they get it the wrong way, then there's no question. We're in agreement on that. Here's the question that I have about wealth inequality. I just feel that there comes a point where the additional 3 or 4 billion, close to $1 trillion that somebody has is just not doing anything for them, and it's not helpful for anything under any circumstances. Even if they got it completely morally, somebody came up with a brilliant idea and it just worked wonderfully. There comes a point where their retention of that much money, A, has to have a psychological effect on them, and B, is almost like they become almost like constipated. It's like money has to flow in an economy. Things have to come in and go out and the like. And here it gets tied up into one place. Look, I was down in Costa Rica, and right across the bay from us is the flagship Four Seasons Resort. And there's a marina there. And Jeff Bezos had his yacht over there at the Four Seasons Marina. And we went over to the other side of the bay and we're looking across at it. This thing was a 3-masted schooner as big as the famous Cutty Sark, the flagship of the British fleet, back when it was huge, huge, huge schooner. It's not even a schooner. It's as big as 4 yachts long. And next to it was a yacht that any billionaire would be proud to own, and that was for his staff. And the guy didn't even come in on the yacht. He arrived by helicopter. So you look at something like that and say, the poor average schmuck on the street, who's making, $12 an hour and is having trouble paying his rent or making decisions, working 2 jobs, whatever, didn't get the education that he needed, didn't have the skills, doing the best that he can, honest worker, good guy. But he just looks over that and goes, I can't even understand that. So there is there is a point where I don't think that it's productive. I don't think that it's helpful. And I don't think it does any good for that person. And now we even have a common term that's going around. These people are being called part of the Epstein class. Those people who have so much money that they're beyond the touch of any systems or law or anything, and can pretty much, are unaccountable. And, we say in America, we say we're governed by the rule of law and that no person is above the law. But there comes a point when there are some people that are simply unaccountable. And, so maybe the way that he got it wasn't immoral. Maybe it was completely moral and completely justified. But maybe there comes a time when it really just becomes immoral. That's how, that's my gut feeling. Huh?
No, I understand what you're saying. And I certainly agree that I'm not crazy about the optics. And if I were ever in that position, I would avoid that kind of optics.
Mm-hmm.
If I were ever in that position, I would like to think I'd be more like Warren Buffett, who still lives in the house he grew up in.
Yeah. Now there's a guy who, you got to tip your hat to and say, I respect this guy.
But there's a lot of people that have money that are like that. And, But I should also point out that I've actually done the calculations, and Jeff Bezos has saves the average American $2,000 to $3,000 a year.
Okay.
So he's giving me $2,000 or $3,000 a year, and I'm going to worry about what boat he has. I can't see it. I mean, he's made my life better. He's made everybody's life better. And like I said, I'm not crazy about the optics, but I don't see a real problem there.
But can the optics be the problem? I mean, if it's not good
I would
optics,
certainly agree.
it has to be not good optics for a reason.
Yeah, I understand that the optics are part of the things that, to some extent, push people towards socialism. And to that extent, I'm concerned about it.
Yeah.
But I don't see a way to fix it, honestly. I mean, are we going to say, put limits on how big a yacht a guy can build? Or, I mean, I would like to see it, I don't know, I guess an ethic of some sort begin to germinate among the ultra wealthy that says, we shouldn't do that. Um, it's creating a bigger problem that may end up backfiring on us. And I think I think that's true. I think that um, a lot of the reason that people lean towards socialism is they see people with a lot and don't see the 2,000 or 3,000 that Bezos contributes to them every year.
Correct. Nobody's going to see that. Nobody will see that, and they will see the boat. But so, I mean, here's something that kind of makes sense to me, just as a hypothetical. So we both agree that an uneducated, uninformed electorate that's subject to propaganda and is easily moved by propaganda would probably be assisted in making wiser decisions if there was some kind of neutral information that was coming to them, and perhaps a better education system, and perhaps if we had civics classes again, because you don't have much civics in high school anymore. Although I got to say, my daughter, who's just going into high school, was telling me about her history lesson, and I was just so proud to hear that she knew what Memorial Day was, and she knew what D-Day was, and she knew what so many pieces of American history were. And I was proud to hear that. But this makes sense to me. If that's the problem, and there is a potential of unused excessive wealth, then can't we take some of that excessive wealth, and of course we can argue on what excessive means, that goes beyond any need that a person might have, and take some of that and use it to create that educational system that would be helpful in creating a more informed electorate? Does that make sense, or is that more government control of the means of production, which would be education in this case?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think there's reasons for concern there. Again, first of all, as you mentioned, how do you decide how much is too much, and what do you mean by need? In other words, like for example, if you look at Elon Musk, he doesn't live particularly fancy. Virtually all of his wealth is tied up in his companies, and so what do? Make him sell some of his companies? I mean, and that's true of a lot of people that have a lot of money. Is that they don't? It's not sitting in a bank somewhere. It's not in their wallet. It's tied up in assets, and that's probably true for you and I as well. I mean,
yeah, I don't
we
have a
keep
lot
a
of
lot of
money in the
money in
bank
our
account. Yeah, right.
Yeah, and so to me, that's the first problem. Then there's a problem of things like, what about things like art? I mean, does a guy that owns a Utrecht have to go and sell it because he's got too much art? I mean, there's a whole lot of stuff in there that really troubles me. That you're trying to micromanage people's lives in ways
yeah, which you shouldn't be doing. I mean, freedom is not. Freedom is not telling somebody he has to sell his art.
Yeah, and so again, I sympathize with the rich. I sympathize with your concern about the rich that are being overly showy about it. But there's a whole lot of them out there that aren't.
That's true.
And it's probably most true of the very richest. I mean, Bezos is probably the exception. I mean, most of the rest of them aren't in that category. Gates gave away more last year than most people make.
Right.
Most other billionaires make,
right.
even. And so, yeah, using wealth itself. I mean, yeah, as the way, I just don't see a way to make it work effectively without actually doing far more harm than good.
Yeah. No,
the other thing is that it's a slippery slope. I mean,
it is.
If we look at the world, I don't know much about your economic situation, but I'm guessing that you and I are easily in the top 1% of the world. In fact, probably most people in America are in the top 1% in the world. And so does that mean we have to give up all of our wealth, if you want to call it that, for other countries? I mean, how far do we go with this? I mean, and many of these schemes start out, I mean, when the first progressive income tax came in, it was 3%. And only if you made over $1 million a year. That didn't last long, did it? And those are the places where the problems come in, is that we start in one place, but pretty soon you run out of other people's money. So you have to start digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And pretty soon everybody's paying a lot. And that's indeed the case in a lot of the social democracies, is that the tax rates are above 50% for most people.
And the people are happier. I mean, I guess what it comes down to in many cases. I have this little pet theory that I talk about the great wisdom teachers when I'm talking about the moral wisdom teachers from the Buddha and Gandhi and Jesus and the great wisdom teachers. Everybody thinks that they came to teach us to be moral, to be just good people, and to make a better world. And I have an alternative theory. My alternative theory is that all that they ever wanted was for you to be happy. And they just discovered in their own experience that when you are good and generous and concerned about your fellow man and compassionate and all those qualities that they teach, so vigorously, they discovered that you're generally happier. And maybe the economics, maybe there is a certain prosperity, and capitalism certainly works better, but social democracy and more regulation and higher taxes for the common good tends to make countries happier countries. Because there's one thing I think we can probably agree about, that most Americans are not very happy. They are work-oriented. Huh? Maybe I'm generalizing here. I'm generalizing, but if you go... And it depends on the country, but,
Yeah, the statistics show that the majority of Americans are happy. They're not quite as happy as some of the social democracies, as self-reported. But it's a close call. It's not like the social democracies are way more happy.
No, last year, America ranked 42.
Okay, I haven't seen that study, but
yeah,
I don't dispute
42.
It.
But Sweden and the Scandinavian countries rank pretty high. Switzerland ranks pretty high. These are pretty And I'll tell you something, Dr. Doug, I'll tell you something. If the government came to me and they said to me, you don't have to worry about putting your kids through college, you don't have to worry about health, and if you lose everything, we'll have something for you. You're not going to starve. If they told me that and they told me I had to pay 60% of what I made for it, I would say, take it. I'm happy. I give it to them gladly. Ultimately, I think I come out better.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but here's where I disagree. I think that when you do it by taxation, I think that, how can I put this? My concern, I guess, is that when you help by giving freely, I think that improves your happiness. I think when it's taken from you in taxation, ultimately, now it may not happen right away, which is why I'm not ready to rule on the Nordic countries yet, because it takes time for this type of stuff to happen. But my concern is that when it happens because it's being taken from you, you lose the good feeling, you lose the sense of I'm helping.
Well, unless if it is taken from you, but if it is by consensus and by the culture that we all agree that we're going to pay into the pot to do this, then it's given freely. It's not really taken from you if it's by consensus.
And if that happened as a consensus, I would agree. I don't think that's ever going to happen.
Well, mostly consensus.
Well, I mean, you might be able to do it with 51% of the vote. Again,
we're back to that. I think it's higher there. I think it's higher there. I think it really, because I think it is because
the polls don't seem to indicate that. In fact, the polls seem to indicate the reverse, that most Americans think they pay too much in taxes.
No, not Americans, Norwegians. I'm talking about the Scandinavian countries.
Again, yeah, that is so new that it's a tough call right now. It takes a long time for psyche to change, for the public psyche to change. And I think it's likely that over time, they'll start not being so happy with that.
Okay. All right. I got to call it at this point. We're a little bit over time, but it's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm so happy that you came on and decided to converse with me and talk with me. You've opened my eyes up to a couple of things that I need to consider a little bit more deeply, and I thank you profoundly for that. And I think we can leave and say that we still are friends and that these conversations are possible. So, folks, you got to talk a little. If you get a little emotional, it's okay. But then you got to take a breath and then you got to listen a little. And you got to talk a little, you got to listen a little. It doesn't mean that you have to be a wuss, but it does mean that you have to be polite and you have to be open. And Dr. Cardell, I really appreciate.
And you've given me a lot to think about as well, I should say.
And that's how it should be. Yes. So folks, I hope that you stuck with this conversation, and I hope that you got out of it, if nothing else, then if not the points that we were making about economy, but that discourse is possible. And I thank you so much, Doctor, for coming on and sharing with us your thoughts.
And thank you for having me. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
I would like that very much. Let's do it after the midterms, because I'm going to tell you this, no matter, we may disagree about what's going to happen before the midterms, but I bet that you will agree with me that whatever happens in the midterms afterwards, there's going to be some healing that's necessary. Either
I hope
way,
so.
either way, whichever way it goes, the other side, there's going to be some healing that's going to be. And the other thing that I deeply hope in the bottom of my heart, my dad used to be very fond of quoting, and I don't remember if it was Voltaire or Camus, but who it was, maybe you know. But the comment was, the victim becomes the executioner. And I deeply, deeply hope that if the power reins change hands, that the new winner becomes restrained in how they act and
I agree
open
completely.
to some of those great things the wisdom teachers taught us, like forgiveness, acceptance, compassion, and the like.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it.
Okay.